Here are some more examples of how the Apostle Paul's teachings repeatedly go against what the teachings of Jesus Christ actually said. In Romans chapter 1, verse 22, Paul is speaking to the unrighteous men and saying, they profess to be wise, but they are fools. Jesus said, "You was told in the days of old, do not commit murder. But I tell you that he who is angry with his brother in his heart has already committed murder. Those who look at their brother and say, Racha, is answerable to the Sanhedrin. But those who look at his brother and say, you fool, will be in danger of the fires of hell." So Paul calls people fools. Jesus says that those people who call others fools are in danger of the fires of hell. Romans 1, verse 27 through 32, Paul goes on a condemn fest, saying all of these different types of sinners deserve death. Jesus said that God is merciful and that God sends the rain on the good and the evil, and that he does good things for the bad and the good. So we should strive to be like our Father in heaven. Paul says they deserve to die. Jesus says that we should be merciful and love everyone, sin or not. 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 10, the Apostle Paul says, a long laundry list of those who do not inherit the kingdom of heaven: the sexually immoral, idolaters, adulterers, gays, thieves, greedy, drunkards, revilers, swindlers. But you see, Jesus taught that some men do not take wives because they were born that way. And Jesus taught that having the Spirit is like new wine in old wineskins, that you have to renew the outside as well as the inside. Jesus talked about changing the water to wine and wineskins, and he said to the Pharisees, the Son of Man comes to you eating and drinking, and you say he is a glutton and a drunkard. Jesus didn't teach it was wrong to drink wine, or that you wouldn't go to heaven for drinking wine. The Apostle Paul, however, did. In 1 Corinthians 11, verse 3, it says that Christ is supreme over men. The Apostle Paul says that men are supreme over their wives. Jesus did not teach that men were supreme over women. If anything, he taught that men and women are equal and are of equal value. First Corinthians 11, verse 4, right after that, it says, a man who prays or proclaims God's message in public worship with his head covered disgraces Christ. Now see, back in the old days, the Jews had cloths that they would wear up over their head when they would pray in public. It was often referred to as their prayer closet. And Jesus in his verses said that when you pray, do not pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by men, but rather go into a private room and close the door, close the closet, and pray to your Father in secret. Paul says to cover your head in prayer, and praying in private disgraces Christ. Christ says that you should pray in private. 1 Corinthians 11, verse 7 says, a man has no need to cover his head because he reflects the image and the glory of God. But man, according to the Old Testament, gave up the right to be considered equal to the glory of God unless they had Jesus Christ. So that's subjectable. But nonetheless, it points that the idea that man needs to not cover his head and be proud when he's praying in public, and that's not what Jesus taught. 2 Corinthians 6, verse 14. He says, "Do not work together as equals with unbelievers, for it cannot be done." It's better known as "do not be equally yoked with sinners," or with unbelievers. Jesus ate with tax collectors and sinners. Jesus said to the Pharisees, "For these sinners shall enter into the kingdom of heaven before you," when he was talking to the Pharisees. So Jesus says sinners will enter into the kingdom before the Pharisees. And he ate with and was friends with sinners. Yet the Apostle Paul says that you're not to be working together with a sinner, and you're to abstain from them and be as far away from them as you can. 2 Corinthians 11:4. Apostle Paul says he worried because you gladly tolerate anyone who comes to you and preaches a different Jesus, not the one that we preached, and they preach a different spirit and a different gospel than the one we preached. Basically, he's saying, don't believe anybody who preaches something other than me, other than I, or the one I send in specific. And that is not what Jesus taught, because Jesus taught that the disciples came to him and they said, "Master, we saw someone who was casting out demons in your name, and we told them to stop because they was not part of our group." And Jesus said, "You should not have done that. Because if they are saying good things about me, they cannot turn around and say bad things about me. He who is not against me is with me." Paul says, don't allow others to teach you something different than me about Jesus. Jesus said, don't stop other people because they're not part of your normal group. Big difference. 2 Corinthians 11, verse 13, the Apostle Paul said that those men are not true apostles. They are false prophets, false apostles, who lie about their work and disguise themselves to make them look like true apostles of Christ. That's not for man to judge, that's for God to judge. Jesus said that you are to accept a prophet and you would gain a prophet's reward. It didn't say if you accepted it said to be wary of false prophets and to pay attention for false prophets, but it did not say to judge people ahead of time. It did not say to write other people off because they simply didn't teach the same exact things. Galatians 1, verses 15 through 19, he admits that he preached without advice and teaching from others, from the other disciples. And it wasn't until 3 years later that he finally spent 2 weeks with the Apostle Peter in Jerusalem. Then he separated from him for 14 years. They never saw each other again. Then he and Paul did see each other again, and Paul was arguing with Peter. Now let me ask you something. If Paul persecuted them, and then he preaches without advice from other disciples according to his own words, and his teachings do not match with Jesus Christ's teachings, at least mostly don't teach the same things, and then he finally meets up with Peter, who was literally one of the 12 who walked with Jesus, and they don't get along either, and he disagrees with him. Could it be that maybe the Apostle Paul was teaching false doctrine? I believe so.